Thank you. And this is my second time in one of these curated collision sessions. So it's the second session. So this has been great for me. Nice to meet a lot of people. And I'm with one of the sponsor companies, Bridge Bio. Most of my pharmaceutical career has been in regulatory affairs. So working through from drug discovery, though, to supporting marketed products, and even taking marketed products that went through their life cycle off market as well. When it comes to AI in drug discovery and development, I don't have a lot of direct experience, but I am an interested partner with people who have done some interesting things with AI. And I'll just leave it at that and see where we go with the conversations.
Hi, I'm Derek Chang. I lead an oncology data science group at Bayer. Most of my colleagues are actually in Germany, and I'm the only one in Boston so far. But I help, or my team helps with computational analysis for the entire stages of drug discovery, starting with target identification all the way through to trying to find predictors of response in clinical trials. And then Eugene, were you suggesting that all of us introduce ourselves because there's a small room? Okay, so Eugene, want to go next, and then Joan, Arnold, and Janet?
Sure. Thanks, Derek, and thanks, Stu. My name is Gene Tunick. I'm the Associate Dean for Research and Innovation at Bouvet College, and I'm also a professor in the Physical Therapy, Movement, and Rehab Sciences Department. So my roles are split between administrative, overseeing the research program at the college, and also I run a federally funded research lab focusing on neuroscience of movement, how we control our actions, and what happens in disease when we have stroke or something like that, and rehabilitation approaches. Some of those involve modeling, and some of those involve robotics and virtual reality. So I will stop, and I forget who was next.
Let's go with Joan.
Yeah, it's me. Hi, so my name is June, and I'm a fifth year student at Northeastern studying pharmacy, and I'll be graduating in 2023 with a PharmD degree. And I guess I don't have any experience in AI and drug discovery, but I would say that I'm an enthusiast in healthcare innovation. I'm obviously just starting to learn about digital health and all these different entities within healthcare innovation. And some of my co-ops have been in clinical trials and regulatory affairs at a pharmaceutical company focused on strategy and labeling. So that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Thanks, June. And Arnold?
Yeah, thank you. I am co-chair of the Bouvet Health Sciences Entrepreneurs Program, and we're very excited about all of the potential ventures that we're hearing about today, and we hope to be able to work out mentoring relationships with at least some of the people who are trying to launch a venture. So that is an important focus of Bouvet, and work closely with Gene on that effort. My own background is in corporate law, and a lot of the, strangely enough, I would say that a lot of the kinds of issues that people are dealing with here can be found in analogs in other kinds of businesses. So it's interesting to see some of the same issues come up. I mean, just to mention one of them is, I guess you could call it human resources, but it is a huge issue when people put ventures together to be sure that they are putting together people who can actually work successfully with each other, and it's something that really it needs attention, and just needs some frank and honest discussion, just to make sure that you don't get halfway through something and then find out that at that point people can't stand each other anymore. So anyway, with that, I will turn it back over to you guys.
Thank you, Arnold, and then Janet.
Janet just messaged me that she's in a room where there's a lot of background noise.
I see, okay.
And so she asked me to maybe introduce her. I'm not sure if she's going to be actually, she said she'll be able to participate by chat, but not by audio. So I'll be monitoring the chat box on her behalf. So Janet is a legal professional in biotechnology, and she's interested in drug development.
Cool. So I put together a icebreaker, I suppose. I just defined, I don't use Zoom very much. Okay. So I put together sort of a question to what are appetites. If you all can go to this website, www.menti.com, and it'll ask you to put in a code for a survey. So this is a real-time survey, and then just type in those numbers 55330992. So it's a multiple choice question. You can pick more than one answer, right? Where do you think are the most promising use cases for artificial intelligence in drug development? And then we can use that as a launching point for our discussion. It looks like we have a uniform distribution everywhere. You can select more than one option if you like. And I didn't vote, so it looks like out of 5 people we have
I didn't select 5, but I did select more than one.
Okay.
Well, that's funny. I selected 2, yeah.
So the purpose for this intro exercise to say that drug development does have a lot of different stages. If you're familiar with, you start with trying to find what targets to develop drugs or antibodies against, and then validating those, trying to come up with actual chemical leads or antibody leads, so lead optimization. And then once the chemical or the antibody finishes the preclinical testing stage, then there's some safety studies in animals before it goes into the clinic. And so then we have patient selection and clinical trial optimization. And when Stu and I were planning this breakout session, we thought, there's a lot of hype about artificial intelligence, about how it could solve all the problems and all the bottlenecks in drug development, but it really relies on having a lot of data, a lot of training data from which to actually make predictions. So it can be a little bit daunting, but these are the different applications for artificial intelligence. At Bayer, we do have publicized collaborations with a couple AI companies. One is called Schrödinger, and they do these computational chemistry simulations. So we use that really with optimizing chemical matter and the lead optimization side. We have another collaboration with a Recursion, which is a startup company that does a lot of image analysis of cells treated with compounds and how the cells change based on compound treatment. So that's sort of both that's also lead optimization more on the cellular assay or the cellular result as opposed to chemical structure. So any questions or comments as we start this discussion?
I'm curious, Derek, there's one category that's not on here on your menti.com icebreaker. And I wonder whether this category is considered in the AI and drug development space, and that is adverse effect prediction of drugs on people before adverse effects actually happen. So can you?
That's a good point. Yeah, I to be honest, I made this survey in 30 seconds. But yes, definitely, a toxicology or adverse event prediction would be another really good.
I look at that. I selected the first three: identification, validation, and optimization. And for optimization, that's what I think about as the reducing of the failure rate, right? So there's a lot of aspects that you can screen out potential, or at least have informed decision making for what risks you might be carrying forward, if whether or not they actually occur. So I did lump that into lead optimization,
Okay, yeah.
at least as a participant.
Okay.
I mean, the other areas though that go beyond, right, would be if you think more about the post-marketing commercial phase two, where you could incorporate things with patient experience, are more important. I think what's been covered in some of the other sessions are really about decision making, right, for healthcare providers to have tools, resources to guide potential treatment choices.
Mhm.
But I think
Yeah,
that interesting.
yeah.
I'd be interested to hear about the clinical trial optimization side to say, you know, what types of areas there, because that's patient selection and clinical trial optimization were the areas I saw as more risky in a way. It might be my bias in the type of work I do in regulatory affairs, but be interesting to hear what you guys think about those two.
Novartis is a company I worked at in the past, and they have a published sort of account of their clinical trial optimization through analytics. And they were really trying to refine site selection, sort of speed of recruitment, you know, the quality of the data that the sites come up with, and trying to reduce sort of the paperwork for, you know, opening up sites, getting approvals, and just tracking all of the logistics of, you know, when when sites sign on, how long it takes them to get up and running, things like that. So I was really trying to track the performance of clinical trial sites in their onboarding, patient recruitment, and data quality, the clinical response form data quality.
There's other, you know, interesting applications here that I'd be curious to hear some of your thoughts on, and that is there are interesting drug effects like habituation. You know, a good example is Sinemet in Parkinson's disease. Usually, when individuals with Parkinson's take a drug like Sinemet over prolonged periods of time, their bodies acclimate to the medication, and the physicians have to up the dose. And eventually, upping the dose over time causes a whole class of other deficits, impairments that are drug induced instead of the original Parkinson disease induced. And so the pendulum swings the other way, where now the person is fraught with a whole host of impairments that they didn't have before, that were elicited by the medications that were given to them to get rid of the disease. And the predicting when those habituation related drug dose related effects are going to happen longitudinally is very difficult. And so I wonder if AI is uniquely positioned here, knowing, you know, if you have input parameters like dose and a person's medical profile and some historical data, perhaps like a Bayesian approach, we have some sort of historical data for how the person's been responding to the drug over time, you can kind of predict protracted responsiveness profile, if you will, and have so that the physician can know, okay, you know, in 2 years we're going to be hitting a wall with this drug, so we really have to curtail it, for example.
Well, there'll be an app for that someday, right? Yeah, that's interesting. There's machine learning for certain ocular conditions. I didn't get to work on it directly, but tangentially to see, you know, what was done, and, you know, the data set to look at actually, you know, macular degeneration, I think was mentioned or in an earlier session, but trying to develop apps to you know, have people really not to just say screen into trials, but understand their condition, right? And I think that's what, if their condition's worsening, is there a way to get not just for the physician, that there's a readout to the individual that they're having trouble with some of the tools I've seen are just basic a reading, not an eye chart, but a reading program, and it would measure, I think, the speed at which they could read, or if they missed certain characters in the field of view. So similar thing, right? And it's informative to both. It's the healthcare provider and the individual if they're part of the process. So they can make a decision, right? What are the symptoms of the disease currently enough that warrant increasing the dose in the case of Parkinson's, versus where are they on that, like the shift to now they're going to swing over into having the unwanted adverse events or side effects.
Yeah. I see that we have a new member of the group here, Matthew. How you doing? Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Background in drug discovery, small and large molecule, pharma in Boston and startups in San Francisco, mostly in the CNS and select rare diseases. Nice to see the Bridge Bio group here. Yeah, just kind of back in Boston after a number of years on the West Coast. So just kind of seeing what's new.
Welcome back to Boston.
Yeah, thanks. It's the seaport growth has just been outrageous.
And also Cambridge, East
It is.
Cambridge.
It's true.
Matthew, what do you think are, since you have drug development experience, what do you think are the most promising applications of artificial intelligence?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm familiar with companies like Recursion and In Vitro on kind of the phenotypic screening side. And I think for a lot of rare diseases and certainly patient advocacy organizations that want to take the initiative themselves for whatever reason, whether it's, just out of necessity from lack of commercial interest or limited, basic research. I do like the phenotypic screening approach. Target deconvolution is always a bit of a problem. But I think being able to measure perhaps more sensitive features from image-based analysis and computational platforms, essentially interpreting data from that side is interesting. The chemistry side, I think Exscientia just had a huge, I guess 2 big pieces of news within the past 2 weeks, Cyclica and Atomwise. I don't know. I think it's going to take a while for those types of applications to read out as their true utility. The rate limiting step in drug discovery, in my view, really comes from high quality targets. So one of the reasons why I like rare diseases is that, in my opinion, in a number of those indications, you have a higher confidence that you can identify a very high quality target. I don't know. In my opinion, the current money being thrown at those companies is not worth it. But there are a lot of very smart people on the other side of that bet.
That's a rapidly changing field for sure.
So one of the things that was mentioned at a previous breakout session that I was in was that, and this was not in the drug space, this was in physical rehabilitation space, was that the FDA, when new companies submit, or old companies submit FDA applications to approve their device, the FDA actually does not like AI or ML to be incorporated into those technologies because they don't know what to do with it. They like, kind of more simple deterministic types of algorithms or approaches. that are simpler and easier to understand. And I'm wondering, in the space of drug development, whether any of you guys have come across whether there are FDA hoops, regulatory wise, when it comes to AI touching anything in the drug world. Or we haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, I haven't seen it personally yet. Seen it in the development of, in one previous example, an optical biosensor that was looking to be developed. That could mimic an invasive procedure for a cardiac transducer type approach. So this was, it's interesting. It may have utility. The danger I had of being in regulatory affairs at the company that I was at the time, were what were people going to do with the information that they collect in clinical trial? And the reason to do it when the clinical trial was as a sub-study, in a group of patients with a specific disease, where there was interest to do this. Otherwise, and it was a rare disease, so otherwise to find people to just, with no other information. So sure, you can find someone with a disease, you can put this optical sensor on their wrist, you can collect data. They could collect data from as many healthy, people in the population as they want, and build, start to build the algorithms and use machine learning to predict, data that's collected on a heartbeat by heartbeat basis. But in my role, I'm more concerned about the risk to the integrity of a blinded clinical trial. What are people doing with the information? And oftentimes, especially in smaller, I've seen in large companies too, but more in smaller companies, where people don't appreciate the potential risk to it, including something investigational or novel, even if it's not interventional, in a clinical trial, how it could jeopardize the primary objective, which is the drug that's being developed as an investigational product. So I've seen, that's one of the challenges I've seen. I think the other one is just gaining access to information, whether it's information on genetic information that might help you inform drug development. So it's still not about the drug itself, but more about the population. Or if there are some open source information, or there aren't. There's registries, there's all sorts of things that people pay a lot of money to generate, but typically whoever funds the registry holds on to that information. And then I've seen many times wanting to access registries, but the way the data are collected, it's not relevant. You can't use it. From the regulatory aspect, there might be some really nice historical data, but the way the consent and the data collection were conducted, it doesn't. You just can't take that information and apply it to a whole new program. Unfortunately, I've seen that challenge too many times.
Stuart, do you think that there's more feasibility in the post-marketing setting? I mean, we're seeing for COVID vaccines all these sort of retrospective analyses of patient records, right? And that the advantage is that it's both more people potentially who are treated, so there's more records to train on, but potentially it doesn't interfere with a label.
Right. Yeah, and especially you have a pandemic, right? You have a global health crisis. I think there's a lot more flexibility. I'm not working in that area, but certainly clinical trials that are being conducted during the pandemic have different levels of, or different degrees of impact from the pandemic. But I have seen a lot more flexibility in regulators, and how are people addressing issues? How are we collecting data? But there's still the underlying data privacy issues, everything else that goes along with, even if you're in a post-marketing setting. It's one thing to have access to the data. The second question is, what are you doing with it? And do you have the rights to actually use the data in a way you would like to? I've seen those are the bigger challenges.